Have you ever wondered why we feel such a desperate need to be good? Why do we dedicate our lives to acting according to others' moral expectations, even when something deep inside us silently screams for freedom, the goodness we so proudly display? To the world might just be a mask for our greatest fear, facing who we truly are when nobody is watching. James woke up with a start at 3 in the morning. A profound discomfort enveloping him like a blanket that was much too heavy. It wasn't physical pain. Something more insidious was eating away at his consciousness. At 42 years old, he had built a life that appeared flawless to outside observers. Respected university professor, weekend volunteer, exemplary husband and father. His reputation for goodness preceded him. And yet there he was, staring at the dark ceiling of his bedroom, suffocated by a question he had never dared to speak aloud. What if all this goodness was, in reality, an elaborate form of cowardice? What if, as Nietzsche had suggested centuries ago, his morality was merely a sedative disguise for his true potential? James's fingers clutched the sheet as a terrible thought began to take shape. All the times he had smiled and agreed with colleagues when he internally disagreed. All those Sunday mornings when he dragged himself to volunteer work while wishing to stay home. The years dedicated to teaching theories he didn't truly believe in. What if his goodness was merely a prison he had built himself, brick by brick, driven by the fear of confronting his own nature? The digital clock on his bedside table read 3:25. When James finally admitted to himself, perhaps Nietzsche was right. Perhaps the morality that guided his entire existence was nothing more than an invention of the weak to control the strong. What if he had been living a glorified lie under the name of virtue? The blue light of the clock blinked like a silent accusation as a chill ran down his spine. He was about to embark on a journey few dare to face, questioning everything we consider sacred. The university corridors felt different the next morning. James walked slowly, his leather messenger bag hanging from his shoulder, observing the students and faculty members with new eyes. How many of them, he wondered, were also living behind carefully constructed masks of virtue? The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. His well-worn copy of Beyond Good and Evil felt heavier in his bag today, like a forbidden secret, threatening to burst forth. In his office, James ran his fingers along the spines of philosophy books that lined his shelves. He had taught Nietzsche's ideas for 15 years, discussing the concept of slave morality with bright-eyed undergraduates who treated it as an intellectual exercise rather than a searing indictment of their own lives. Had he been doing the same, treating these explosive ideas as academic curiosities while continuing to bow to the very moral systems they challenged? "Professor Williams, your 9 o'clock appointment is here." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. James straightened his tie, a reflexive gesture of conformity that now made him wince inwardly. David Chen, the Dean of Humanities, strode into the office with his usual confident gait, hand extended for a firm handshake. "James, good to see you. The board is thrilled with your community outreach program. The local paper wants to do a feature on you, the Professor Who Cares, they're calling it." The dean's broad smile revealed perfectly straight teeth, the result of expensive orthodontic work. "You're becoming the face of our values initiative." The words hit James like physical blows. The face of values, the Professor Who Cares. Each accolade felt like another bar in the cage he had constructed around himself. Did he truly care? Or had he simply fallen into the pattern of appearing to care because it was expected, rewarded, praised? Nietzsche's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual." "That's wonderful news, David," he managed, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. For the first time, he recognized the falseness in his own voice, the practiced tone of humble appreciation that he had perfected over years of accepting recognition for his goodness. Later that afternoon, while lecturing on existentialism to a crowded auditorium, James found himself deviating from his carefully prepared notes. Nietzsche proposed that our conventional morality, what we commonly understand as being good, originated not from divine command or objective truth, but as a psychological weapon of the powerless against the powerful. He paused, studying the faces of his students. Some looked confused, others bored, a few intrigued. None seemed to grasp the visceral importance of what he was saying. How could they? They were young, still building their own cages of moral conformity, still embracing the comfort of being good according to society's standards. Consider this, James continued, his voice taking on an intensity that made several students look up from their laptops. What if the values we hold most sacred, humility, compassion, self-sacrifice, actually serve to domesticate the human spirit? What if they were designed unconsciously, perhaps, to prevent the strong from exercising their natural strength? A young woman in the front row frowned. Are you saying being kind is bad? James felt a surge of frustration. The simplistic binary of good and bad was exactly the prison he was trying to escape. I'm suggesting that our notions of kind and unkind aren't objective truths, but historical developments serving particular interests. Nietzsche urged us to question not just individual moral judgments, but the very basis of how we judge at all. That evening, driving home through the quiet suburban streets, James felt the weight of his day pressing down on him. The houses he passed all looked the same: neat lawns, tasteful decorations, respectable facades, hiding whatever chaos or emptiness might lie within. Just like him, just like everyone. The carefully maintained moral appearance concealing the messy, contradictory truth of human nature. His own house came into view, warm lights glowing in the windows. Inside, his wife Sarah would be preparing dinner. His children would be doing homework or playing video games. They loved him for his stability, his reliable goodness. What would they think if they knew the thoughts now churning in his mind? If they understood that the foundation of their family life, his moral character, was beginning to crack beneath him? James sat in his car for several long minutes before finding the courage to go inside. The mask of the good professor, the good husband, the good father felt suffocating now. But removing it terrified him even more. He wondered if this was what Nietzsche meant by the concept of the abyss, that moment when you realize that all you believed to be solid ground was merely a thin veneer over a bottomless chasm. 3 weeks had passed since James's awakening in the dark hours of early morning. The questions that had disturbed his sleep that night now accompanied him constantly, transforming from vague philosophical musings into urgent, practical dilemmas. Each interaction, each decision now carried the weight of his newfound awareness. Was he acting authentically, or merely conforming to expectations? Was his goodness an expression of strength or weakness? The philosophy department's annual conference provided the perfect stage for James's internal conflict to manifest externally. Scholars from across the country gathered to present papers and debate ideas, most of them safely within the established parameters of academic discourse. James had been asked to moderate a panel on ethics in the modern age, a role he would have previously accepted with appropriate humility and diligence. This time, something different stirred within him. As his colleagues delivered their predictable arguments, appeals to universal human rights, discussions of utilitarian calculations, Kantian imperatives, James felt a growing impatience. These were the same ideas recycled year after year, comfortable intellectual exercises with no power to transform. No wonder Nietzsche had condemned academics as philosophical laborers rather than true philosophers. Professor Williams, "You've been uncharacteristically quiet," remarked Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a renowned ethicist from Princeton. Do you have any thoughts on Professor Goldstein's assertion that contemporary virtue ethics provides a framework for addressing technological challenges? The room fell silent, all eyes turning to James. In the past, he would have offered a balanced response, finding merit in various perspectives, careful not to offend. The perfect academic diplomat. Today, however, Nietzsche's concept of will to power thrummed through his veins. Not power as domination, but as creative force, the courage to assert one's own values rather than inherit them. I find myself wondering, James began, his voice steadier than he expected, if we're asking the wrong questions altogether. We debate which established ethical framework best applies to new problems, but rarely question the frameworks themselves. Nietzsche suggested that our ethical systems are not objective truths, but expressions of particular types of human life, some ascending, vital, and affirming, others descending and life-denying. Uncomfortable shifting filled the room. Professor. Goldstein's lips pressed into a thin line. Are you advocating for moral relativism, James? Asked Hayes, her tone suggesting both curiosity and warning. I'm advocating for honesty, James replied, for the courage to acknowledge that our moral certainties might be comfortable illusions, that perhaps what we call good isn't an eternal truth, but a historical development serving particular interests, often the interests of controlling the exceptional and elevating mediocrity. The panel moderator cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should move on to questions from the audience. But James wasn't finished. Years of suppressed thoughts were finding their voice. Nietzsche called for a revaluation of all values, not to destroy morality, but to create the possibility for more authentic, life-affirming values to emerge. What if our ethical discussions are merely sophisticated forms of herd thinking, ways of avoiding the terrifying freedom of creating our own values? By the time the panel ended, a palpable tension had settled over the room. Some colleagues avoided James's eyes, others studied him with newfound interest. He had violated the unspoken rule of academic discourse, maintain the pretense that all perspectives are equally valid while never truly challenging the foundations. That evening, at the conference dinner, James found himself seated beside Professor Emmett Clark, an emeritus faculty member known for his unconventional approaches to philosophy. Clark leaned toward him, voice low beneath the clink of silverware and polite conversation. Caused quite a stir today, didn't you? The older man's eyes twinkled with amusement. Reminded me of myself 40 years ago, before I learned to package my dangerous ideas in more palatable forms. James studied Clark's weathered face. Is that the only option, to disguise what you really think? Clark sipped his wine thoughtfully. There's a reason Nietzsche wrote that the higher man must wear a mask, not out of deception, but out of necessity. The herd doesn't forgive those who expose its illusions too directly. Then nothing changes, James said, frustration evident in his voice. We just keep pretending, generation after generation. Or, Clark replied, you find the rare individuals capable of hearing the truth without flinching. You speak in different languages to different people. To some you offer comfort, to others liberation. He studied James with new intensity. But first, you must be certain of your own liberation. Are you prepared for what it means to truly stand beyond conventional good and evil, to create values rather than inherit them? James had no ready answer. The question followed him back to his hotel room, where he stood at the window overlooking the city lights. The comfortable moral certainties of his past were crumbling, but what would replace them? Nietzsche had warned that freedom from inherited morality was not enough. One must be worthy of that freedom. What would it mean for James to become worthy? The ringing of his office phone startled James from his contemplation. 6 months had passed since the conference, 6 months of subtle but significant changes in how he moved through the world. He had not undergone a dramatic transformation, no public renunciation of his former self, no scandalous rejection of social norms. Instead, his metamorphosis had been internal and gradual, like water slowly reshaping stone. "Professor Williams." "Speaking," he answered, voice calm and present in a way it hadn't been before. "James, it's Sarah." His wife's voice carried an unusual tension. The school called. Michael got into a fight defending a younger student from bullies. "They want us to come in." 20 minutes later, James sat beside his 14-year-old son, in the principal's office, listening as Mrs. Hendricks detailed the incident in disapproving tones. Michael had physically intervened when 3 older boys were tormenting a 7th grader, resulting in a bloody nose for one of the bullies and a disciplinary hearing for Michael. "While we appreciate Michael's desire to help others," Mrs. Hendricks said, adjusting her glasses, "we have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. Students are instructed to find a teacher rather than taking matters into their own hands." James studied his son's face, defiant yet vulnerable, a bruise forming around his left eye. He recognized something in the boy's expression, a certainty that transcended conventional rules, a willingness to accept consequences for acting according to his own judgment rather than external authority. "Michael," James asked, ignoring the principal's disapproving glance, "would you make the same choice again, knowing the consequences?" The boy met his father's eyes directly. "Yes. They were hurting him, and no teachers were around. They would have really hurt him by the time I found someone." James nodded slowly, feeling an unexpected pride rise within him. Not pride in violence, but in his son's moral autonomy, his willingness to judge a situation for himself rather than blindly following rules. Wasn't this precisely what Nietzsche had advocated? The courage to create values responsive to life rather than abstract principles detached from reality? "Mrs. Hendricks," James said carefully, "I understand your position, but I also want to acknowledge that my son made a difficult, moral choice in a complex situation. There's a difference between violence as aggression and force used to protect the vulnerable." The principal's expression suggested she had expected James, known throughout the community for his impeccable moral character, to side with institutional authority. "Professor Williams, surely you understand the importance of teaching children to respect rules." "I understand the importance of teaching children to think critically about rules," James corrected gently. "To recognize that moral development isn't about blind obedience, but about developing judgment and courage." Later, walking with Michael across the school parking lot, James felt a sense of alignment he had rarely experienced before. He was no longer playing a role or fulfilling expectations. He was engaging with life directly, authentically, responding to its unique demands rather than applying pre-formulated moral recipes. "Am I in trouble with you too?" Michael asked, glancing sideways at his father. James placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No. I think you did something difficult and important today. You judged the situation for yourself instead of just following rules. That matters." "Mum might not see it that way," Michael muttered. "Your mother and I might disagree sometimes," James acknowledged, "but we both want you to become your own person, not just a copy of us or anyone else." That evening, after the children were asleep, James sat with Sarah in their living room, trying to articulate the changes he had been experiencing. She listened attentively. This woman who had shared his life for 17 years, her expression moving from concern to curiosity. "So you're saying Nietzsche wasn't advocating immorality, but a more authentic morality?" she asked, trying to understand. "He was advocating for the courage to question our inherited values and create our own," James explained. "Not out of selfishness, but out of honesty and life affirmation." To recognize that what we call good might sometimes be life-denying and what we call evil might sometimes be life-affirming. Sarah considered this, twisting her wedding ring thoughtfully. "And has this revaluation made you happier?" James paused, searching for the right words. "Not exactly happier. More alive, more present, less divided against myself." He reached for her hand. "I'm still the man you married, Sarah. I still care about being a good husband, father, teacher. But I'm trying to understand those things differently now, not as roles I played to fulfill external expectations, but as expressions of what I truly value." Sarah squeezed his hand, neither fully accepting nor rejecting his new path. "Just don't forget to bring us along on this philosophical journey of yours. Some of us aren't philosophy professors, you know." James smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her gentle reminder. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the overman who creates new values, wasn't meant to be an isolated intellectual. Rather, the truly transformed individual would express their values through how they lived among others, how they loved, how they created. In the months that followed, James continued teaching, volunteering, parenting, all the activities that had defined his goodness before. But now these actions were transformed by his new understanding. When he taught, he sought not merely to transmit information, but to awaken his students' capacity for independent thought. When he volunteered, he did so not from duty or social expectation, but from genuine recognition of shared humanity. When he parented, he focused less on enforcing rules and more on nurturing his children's capacity for moral autonomy. One crisp autumn morning, almost exactly a year after his middle-of-the-night awakening, James stood watching the sunrise from his backyard. The sky blazed with colors no painter could capture, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. He felt a profound gratitude for the journey he had undertaken, not a journey away from goodness, but toward a more authentic understanding of what goodness might mean. Nietzsche had written that the higher man is distinguished from the lower by his fearlessness and his readiness to challenge misfortune. James now understood this not as a call to hardness or cruelty, but to moral courage, the willingness to question even our most cherished beliefs, to risk the vertigo of freedom, to accept the awesome responsibility of creating rather than merely inheriting values. The dark side of goodness, he had discovered, wasn't evil or amorality. It was the shadow cast by unexamined virtue, by goodness accepted as given rather than continuously created. By facing this shadow, James had not abandoned goodness, but transformed it into something more vital, more genuine, more his own. And, in doing so, paradoxically, he had become more truly good than ever before. Perhaps true goodness lies not in what we avoid doing, but in what we have the courage to create, even if it means dancing with our own darkness.